Hebrews 11, verse 39. We're going to be going into chapter 12. And if you've seen the title there, it says a Colosseum Christian. A Colosseum Christian. Now, the reason we're going to say that, and I use that title, is when we get into chapter 12, it becomes readily evident that they're talking about a race. They're talking about running. And a lot of this athletic language that takes place, Paul's used it before, and now the writer of Hebrews is using the same type of language. And so we see him using this type of thing, and this is why many people believe that the Hebrew Christians, we don't really know the audience, we don't really know the author, but the reason they think that this audience was a Hebrew Christians, number one, is because there's so much Old Testament in it. Right? The things that this writer is saying isn't something that a writer could, back in the ancient times, begin to go tell a bunch of Greek people and them understand it. Right? You couldn't start throwing around names like Melchizedek and all that, or just assuming people know what happened with Rahab and Jericho and all these things. So they're assuming whoever this audience is has some background knowledge of the Old Testament, and then they think it was a Hebrew Christians in a house church in Rome because of this, because they hear about all the different issues they're dealing with, and apparently they would have likely been around some of this athletic stuff. Now, the Colosseum in ancient times and in Greek life was a pretty important thing. You've probably seen movies and all these other things, chariot races, things that take place in the Colosseum. Well, the reason it was so important was because if you were great at the games, you know, the Olympics, where we get those from, the Greek games, if you were great at the games, what you won when you got to the end wasn't a lot of money. You didn't get massive, multi-million-dollar contracts until you ran well. Really, all you got was a wreath put on your head. But what came with it was all the honor and the glory. They were running for the sake of the honor. And that was such a big deal because really, if you were a great athlete in the Colosseum, you could become famous. Yeah, you didn't get a lot of money from that, but you probably get treated well in lots of other areas of life because of who you are. People might have been betting on you or all these other things, but hey, we got to treat this guy nice. And why is that such a big deal? Because it wasn't that easy to be famous. Who was famous then? Well, the ones that were born into it. The people who were born into money, or the rich, or the politicians. And so the people that were well known, the only way somebody really that was a peasant could get to a spot where people would look at them with such honor was to be an awesome athlete. And so they began to try to perform in the Colosseum. And so Colosseum life was a big deal to all these Greek people. Well, we got the Christians in the midst of that, and so we're going to see what it means to be a Colosseum Christian as we begin reading in chapter 11, verse 39, and then into chapter 12. Follow along as I read. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. Chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Let's pray. God, as we come to this time, we've read your word, Lord, we begin to dive into it and to see what you have for us. God, I pray that you would speak through it clearly, that you speak in and through me, Father, that anything I say would fall straight to the ground, everything you say would go straight to hearts. And Lord, because you're who we need to hear from. And we ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. And so the first thing I want to talk about is those last two verses of Hebrews 11, just to sort of wrap up Hebrews 11 and move into chapter 12. It kind of goes in very well. And so what's happening there in those last few verses of chapter 11? Well, if you recall last week, we finished up the Hall of Faith. And as we're talking about the Hall of Faith, we talk about all kinds of people. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, and David. We talk about all the unnamed, unsung heroes of this time that were apparently being persecuted. It said being sawn in half. But that entire chapter was full of characters, starting with Abraham, Moses, just to name a few. And so he gets to the end of it, and he says, all of these, and it's important to realize that all of these is Old Testament. Now, of course, all those unsung heroes that they didn't really mention, we don't exactly know what was going on there. I mean, sure, they could have been New Testament people, but using the context, very likely Old Testament believers as well. All these people that it didn't mention. So he's naming all these people. He says, all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. Now that seems problematic. Right? Because if you don't have faith, aren't you supposed to receive the promise? Well, yeah. The matter is not so much if, it's when. Right? It's when. That's why it said Abraham, seeing a city that was far off, a city whose foundations were firm, a heavenly city. He didn't see this one. Right? He was looking for something different. We see the same thing with Moses and his lifelong journey of faith. They're all looking to something. Like, yeah, he had a deliverance from Egypt, but they were looking for even a greater deliverance. And so all of these, though they had faith, they didn't receive what was promised. And then verse 40 is kind of odd. Since God had provided something better for us, talking about these people, these Hebrew Christians, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. Now, what's going on there? Well, you've heard before, but we'll say it again. The story of the gospel doesn't start in Matthew. The story of the gospel starts in Genesis 1. God is at work reconciling a people for himself from the very beginning. After the sin, there was immediately a plan that he was going to redeem man. And all throughout the Old Testament, even when we see the law and all these other things, the writer of Hebrews has been pretty clear about the fact that the law, the temple, the tabernacle, all of these things were simply shadows of something yet to come. There was going to be something better. There was going to be something better than. So when we read the Old Testament and we don't ever see Jesus, we're reading it wrong, because the Bible tells us that everything's pointing to him. That everything's pointing to him. In some ways you see him blatantly illustrated. In other ways you just see a hint, but you know it's all pointing to him. The little book of Ruth, which seems to make, it's a nice story, but it seems to make little sense in the Bible other than, this lady who goes back and she chooses her family, her husband's God over the God of her people and all these things. Great story. Probably could make a movie out of it. Probably already have, right? But that being said, what's so awesome about that whole little short book in the Old Testament? In the very end, the child that was born continues on to the line of Christ. Something that was pointing to something else. And so all of this is pointing to Jesus. And so even when we see this Old Testament, all these had faith. And they didn't receive what was promised. But apart from us, talking about the Christians, these New Testament believers, they wouldn't be perfected. So why in the world does Abraham, or when we hear about the Mount of Transfiguration, remember that when Jesus is with his disciples, his inner circle of disciples, he takes them up onto the Mount of Transfiguration and they begin to see Moses and Elijah. And Peter's like, we got to build 3 altars up here. And they tell him to stop. But what's so interesting about that? Why in the world did Moses and Elijah get there? Well, because they were good Jews. They kept the law. Nope. They were there because they had faith. Abraham was counted righteous because of faith. They trusted God and they received righteousness. And then you got to say, well, how can faith save? Because even though it hadn't yet happened, it was going to be perfected because one was going to come who was going to die on the cross. And so we see all of these that he says, all these, though commended through their faith, didn't receive what was promised, but they did when Jesus came. And they receive it even fuller when everything's in the end. It's consummated and it's fixed, and faith is made silent. Everything that is sin is done away with, and all the great promises are completely fulfilled. But y'all, when he died on the cross and said, it is finished, and then rose from the dead, he secured it. And so we see that at the end of chapter 11, and then it rolls right into chapter 12. He says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, and that's our first point, a cloud of witnesses. So we see this cloud of witnesses mentioned, and so when we look back, we're looking back at the entire chapter 11. And so I've already mentioned some of the characters to you. I won't do it again. Many of these are Old Testament figures, but it tells us that they were there. They were around them. This was a reminder to this storm-tossed church, this Hebrew Christian church that was likely dealing with a lot of persecution or impending persecution. Many think that this letter might have been written right before the persecution of Emperor Nero, which was a really bad one for Christianity, not because people hated Christians necessarily, but because Nero used the Christians as a scapegoat and told them that they started a fire that didn't start, mainly so he wouldn't get in trouble. Right? And so he pushed it all onto the Christians, politicians, and he blamed it on them. And they began to get persecuted harshly by the Roman government. And so they think this might have been written right around there. We're not really sure, but all we do know is that there was either persecution or they were on the brim of persecution. They were beginning to worry. They were beginning to think maybe we should bail out of this thing. Maybe we shouldn't stick to it. And so the entire book, let's not forget it, just because we're in chapter 12, don't forget the other 11 chapters. The entire book, the writer of Hebrews has been telling you that Jesus is not only worth it, he's the only answer. He's been telling you that Jesus is the great high priest, that he's greater than any of the prophets, that he's greater than any of the angels, and that any faith anywhere else would be a misplaced faith. That bailing out wasn't the answer, but rather sticking firm to the end. And so he's still encouraging them on that. He says, we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. He's wanting them to remember all these that have gone before him in order to bring out encouragement for them. All these that faithfully stayed the course, the writer fully intends that his audience, the people he's talking to, is going to be one of those as well. Yet the cloud of witnesses gives a sense of encouragement, and really I think it gives a sense of accountability too. Anybody got any, it really works better for older siblings. We've got any people with older siblings, not that you are an older sibling, but with older siblings. If you are an older sibling, nobody likes you. Okay, so, no, because I'm the younger sibling and everybody knows baby's best. Anyway, that being said, sibling rivalry is real, is it not?
Yes.
Yes, exactly it is. And so I remember my brother, he's 6 years ahead of me, so even though we had a rivalry, I'm the only one that was aware of it. I don't think he cared about me at all, right? He's like, I don't think I'm not even close to it. But he didn't know I was chasing him the whole time. I was trying to do everything he could do, and I was trying to do it better. I remember my brother, he was, this isn't too impressive, I don't want to make this sound impressive, so I'll dumb it down by saying, but my school was really, really small. Right? But we had a really, really small elementary school, but he got valedictorian at the elementary school. Right? In 6th grade, valedictorian, they had that. Right? It was a big deal to me. And so I got to get that too. So I did. I beat it, right? So if you ever want to look it up, let me do the math. I don't remember what year it is. Holly Springs, Montlow Elementary School, valedictorian. You're looking at it. Made it. Beat out that other little kid. Trying to cheat off my test. Anyways, so we get off. I beat him to valedictorian. And while I'm doing that, my brother's in high school. And he's good at basketball. He's starting on varsity. And he's doing great things for the team. And you know what? Their team kind of stunk because we weren't really a basketball team. But I've got to play basketball. Right? So I get into middle school and I start playing basketball. And I had so much pressure to make those tryouts. And I remember in 7th grade, it was almost impossible because they let all the 8th graders and they kept like 2 7th graders. I think, they're just trying to make sure kids got on the team before they finished middle school. But I remember I didn't make it my 7th grade year, and you would have thought my life would. And I was like, oh no. I had to do that. My brother did it. Why did I do it? Well, 8th grade, I had to do even better. 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, began to play basketball, and I got to starting too. And I wasn't, honestly, don't y'all ever tell him this, but I wasn't nowhere near as good as he was. I know it, but he doesn't know it because I got awards, and I just acted like I was better than I was. Right? I'm like, look at this plaque. Coach's Award, Most Improved Player, right? And so that's the one they give you. But anyways, at least my team won games. I can say that. So regardless, I was chasing him through high school, chasing him for grades, and then he went to college, and he actually went to Clemson. He had a scholarship, and he lost some of it. He couldn't keep up, and I finally beat him. It's like a loser, right? But anyways, the point was, nobody doesn't watch this online. The point was that I did chase him. Now, he really probably didn't know we had a rivalry going on. He really was encouraging me more than anything. He was setting a bar that I was kept trying to shoot for. Shoot for and beat, shoot for and beat. It pushed me, it encouraged me, and it also kind of held me accountable. But it was because he had gone before me. It pushed me to do even more. Now, this letter is written to Jewish Christians, and in the time of writing, like I said, they're probably going through a harsh time. But as they're looking there at this list of believers that he's just went through in the Old Testament, heroes in the Hall of Faith, he doesn't say to them, look at Abraham, look at Moses, look at these guys, you'll never be them. He doesn't say that. Rather, he says, you're meant to be one of them. Are you going to do it? He's telling these people, look, Abraham wasn't anything special, but he had faith. And so God did something special through him. Moses wasn't anything special, but he had faith. And so God did something special through him. And he's telling these Christians, yeah, you might not think you're anything special, but if you have faith, if you just watch, God will do something special through you. He's explaining to them that this cloud of witnesses is somebody that they can not only just look to as unattainable, but they can emulate. We can add to this list now, past Old Testament. We can add people like Paul and Peter. They didn't do that because likely most of the New Testament is still being written. But Paul and Peter as well. And the reality is you can probably even add more to your cloud of witnesses. Maybe that grandmother or grandfather that was an example of faithfulness that has gone on. A family and heritage. People that you can look to in your line that you look to as faithfulness. The great heroes of our time. Somebody like a Billy Graham who ministered his entire life for the gospel. And yet many people that have reached that level, Satan attacks like crazy. And they fall into sin, and yet God protected him through it. Not any besmirching of his name or anything. Those type of people we add to our cloud of witnesses. They all make it up. They've gone before us. That should encourage you, but it should also challenge you. It should encourage you to know it can be done. It should challenge you to know you're supposed to be a hero of faith as well. And so when I say a Colosseum Christian, he's going to get into this language of running in a minute. But if you can just imagine, and you don't have to because if you're worried about your neighbor hitting you, but if you're not worried about your neighbor hitting you, you can close your eyes for a minute. And you just imagine that you're standing in the middle of a massive Colosseum, probably the one that you see on TV. It doesn't matter what you picture, but picture the Roman Colosseum. And picture all those people sitting in the stands, cheering for you, egging you on, and you're getting ready to run a race. That's what he's wanting these believers to see. And so he begins, therefore we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. He says, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. We want to look at clinging sin on this next part. Clinging sin. So we're in the Colosseum, we're getting ready to perform, and the writer warns us to lay aside the weights and the sins. It's like the weights that he's talking about here. You ever wore those leg weights before, the big lumpy ones? Right? I used to wear them because I was going to beat my brother at basketball. And I don't know if you know this, but gravity and this weight, the two don't go together. Right? So jumping up in the air never was my strong suit. Running people over was my strong suit, but not jumping up in the air. And so I had to wear leg weights. And so you put the leg weights on, and you got to wear the big old jeans so nobody sees you clomping around like this. But if you ever wore those things before, and then you take them off, it looks like you're walking on air for like 5 minutes. But it is. You just feel so light. You feel like you could really jump out of the gym. You can't. I tried it, but it feels that way. And he's using the same type of analogy here. He said, lay aside the weights, those things. And here, it might not, I think there's a reason he splits them. It isn't the same thing as sins, but I think it's a hindrance. Right? Take them off and realize how much lighter you feel. Some things in our life aren't exactly sinful, but they are far from helpful. They're hindrances to growth, and they're barriers we need to tear down. However, there's also sin which clings so closely. He says, lay aside the weights and the sin which clings so closely. That's the nature of sin. That's how sin works. He wants you to remove these things so that you can run with endurance and efficiency. Sin comes like a parasite, and getting rid of it can be a hard one once the symptoms begin to set in. We're here in the country. I know we got many of you probably raised up in some more rural areas. I know I remember playing out in the fields. Right? So this is where I'm going with this. You remember going out in the summer and having, this experience. It's not a pleasant one, so don't worry, you didn't miss anything. But you remember going out in the fields, and Mama would always tell me to put more clothes on because I was going to eat up with briars. And I didn't care, right? I ain't worried about that. And so you just take off, and you're wearing like, y'all might not have been me, I was wearing basketball shorts. Remember, I'm trying to keep up with my brother. But no, I'm wearing basketball shorts, and it's a silky material, and you take off through the field, and you're having a lot of fun. You go out through the woods. Sure, you get the briar marks all over you, get scratches all over you, and tell people you want a cat. But anyways, you get to the end, you come back, you're ready to keep playing, maybe you're out with your cousins or whatever, and if you go out in a field at the right time of the year wearing that type of clothing, you know what you come back with? All those stupid little brown burrs stuck to you. You know what I'm talking about? The ones that just cover your clothing. And you don't recognize it until it's too late. And then instead of getting to keep on playing, you got to sit down now. You got to pick every one of those little things off. And hopefully it's the little ones that look like shells, because it's the little pokey needle ones. Those are even worse. But you got all those things. They just cling to you. Never even knew it. You just ran through the wrong plant, the wrong time, and it stuck to you. That's the nature of sin. All it takes is brushing up against the plant you're stuck. All it takes was flirting with sin, and it'll find a way to cling to you. It creates an infestation. It makes you stop and sit down to deal with it. One thing I think we have to realize that we can tend to forget is that the Christian life is a spiritual war. The Christian life is a spiritual war. You've probably heard it said before that I love one of my pastors that I grew up with. He said this, and I never forgot it. He said a divine operation always has satanic opposition. That's what he would say. Divine operation always has satanic opposition. Now what he meant by that was, he said, if you're going to do anything for God, you best believe there's going to be a Satan there to stop you. He's going to try everything he can. What you really need to worry about is when you never get attacked by him, because he doesn't see you as much of a threat because you're not living for Christ. That's kind of a bummer. If we're just going off and doing whatever he already wants us to do, that is, following the world and following the ways of Satan, why in the world would he have to attack you? He has nothing to stop. You're doing a good enough job ruining a witness. But you take for a minute and you start trying to live the Christian life of holiness and faithfulness, and you start to try to share your faith and begin to really spread the gospel, you're going to face opposition. Sin isn't something that we just arbitrarily fall into, even though that is possible. Sin is something that's fired at us, and it clings. Satan is often at work. He's always at work, constantly trying to cause us to stumble, and it clings so closely. And we got to deal with it before it overtakes us. We need to realize that sin is something that hinders you in the race. You have to shed the weights to run well, and a cloud of witnesses are watching. So what's going on here? Well, we're sitting in the Colosseum. We got all these people ready for us. And well, guess what? We realized we're not yet ready. We're still wearing the leg weights. We got all this junk on us that we really got to get rid of. We're going to be able to run. And he says, so therefore, lay aside the weights and the sin which clings so closely. Begin to call those things out. Recognize them. The worst thing you can do is cover up your sin. Mainly because you ain't hiding it from God. He knows it. And the only person that you're really choosing to live in denial from is yourself. And you know what happens when you're in denial? You eat by alligators. That was a joke that Debbie laughed. Anyway, no, seriously. When you're in denial, you're not going to work on it. It's going to constantly eat at you. You're never going to let go of it. So we got to lay aside the clean sin. But then look at the next thing it says, lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. We compete with endurance. Compete with endurance. The text goes to this athletic language. He tells them to run with endurance. The persecuted church needed the word. They've been running sprints full of joy. But the writer tells them to realize that this life is a marathon. The race we run doesn't have immediate gratification of a finish line over and over and over again. Rather, it's the long game. Furthermore, it says that they're to run the race that is set before them. I think that's an interesting way to say it. The race that is set before you. We don't deal the cards, but we do play the hand. We have a path laid ahead of each of us. Each is different, but they're all good. Each has different roles, but we all make an impact. Some may have more suffering, but all have a cost. And yet the goal is we're all to run with endurance. Whatever race is set before you, whatever path is set before you, run it with endurance. Don't run it with the most speed. That ain't what he's going for here. And rather, as I said, it's a marathon. This is something, the Christian life is one that takes endurance. I heard this story. I thought it was good. In 1981, Bill Broadhurst entered the Pepsi Challenge, a 10,000 meter race in Omaha, Nebraska. Surgery 10 years earlier from aneurysm in the brain had left him paralyzed on his left side. Now on that misty July morning, he stands with 1,200 athletic men and women at the starting line. The gun sounds, the crowd surges forward, and Bill throws his stiff left leg forward, pivots on it as his foot hits the ground. His slow, plop, plop, plop rhythm seems to mock him as the pack races into the distance. Sweat rolls down his face, pain pierces his ankle, but he keeps going. Some of the runners complete the race in about 30 minutes, but 2 hours and 29 minutes later, Bill reaches the finish line. A man approaches him from a small group of remaining bystanders. Though exhausted, Bill recognized him from a picture in the newspaper. He's Bill Rogers, the famous marathon runner, who then drapes his newly won medal around Bill's neck. Bill Broadhurst's finish was just as glorious as that of the world's greatest, though he finished last. Why? Because he ran with endurance. Another way I think about that is campfires. I had my experience with that this past weekend. We took Jamie on our first camping trip, and we were out at the campground. And we were building a fire in the cold, what's what I'm looking for here? It's a good word. I know you are expecting me to say something incriminating, but it's a good word. She's in a nursery, though, so there was any time. See, I only say it to her face, but she's got to be sitting. Anyway, no, she was being very crafty. She had been saving the dryer lint for weeks for a fire starter. It's fantastic, by the way. It makes you really worry about what your dryer is. Clean out your dryer is, because that stuff is flammable. But anyway, she saves a bunch of it. She puts it in this little baggie. We began building up the fire and put some of that in there. And yeah, you might just some dry leaves or something on top of it. And you light it, and that stuff will spark like a Christmas tree. But it burns and it fizzles out super fast. You got to have something that'll keep it going. But the best fire is the one that gets those logs nice and hot. And the logs just stay flaming, and the coals are nice and warm, and anything you set on it will just set it to a blaze. That's what you're looking for. And guess what? That's what we're looking for. And that's what Christ is wanting in this Christian life as well. There's a lot of flash in the pan, but it fizzles out really fast. This is why I've said over and over again, a fake faith won't last. Why? Because it's based on something that isn't real. A true faith in the Savior Jesus Christ, the one who came, lived a perfect life, died on a cross, rose from the dead, and is now at the right hand of the Father, ever making intercession for us. The one who gave us a promise that we're looking for something greater. The one who's with us that never leaves us nor forsakes us. That's the one that's real. When you truly have faith in Him, when you've given Him everything and not just given Him a piece, when you haven't just asked Him to be a part of your life, but you actually given Him your life, and you have a true faith in Him, everything goes away and the storms come and you lose some stuff and you gain some stuff and the road gets rocky, but you never lose that relationship. You run with endurance. You got a fire inside of you, and it's a fire that's burning strong. It might be low and glowing at times, but it's never going out. And it'll often come to a blaze again, and there'll be periods in life that it blazes even more. But so many people have a faith that is nothing but live. They're excited, and then they realize, hold on, I didn't think Jesus would let this happen to me. He never promised us an easy life. He promised us a future life. And so, you may have heard it before, it doesn't matter how well you start, but how well you finish. Well, that's true, and it comes from this idea of running. It's the tortoise and the hare story. This doesn't mean you should just be walking just because you can, right? I know some people, they go run a 5K, they can do it. It don't mean you should be walking necessarily. The problem isn't those that are on fire, that are taking off full speed. The problem is those with limited sight and that phony faith. In the strength of Christ, you can give your all, but realize that it's a marathon. The impact you make in this life may not be immediately evident, but you will see. Maybe not even this side of eternity, but you will see it. The goal is not for us to heap up medals for all the sprints we've won. The goal is to faithfully run the race and be like Paul in his life. I finished the race. I've kept the faith. And so then we finally see, consider Jesus as our final point. He says, verse 2, looking to Jesus. the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. And the final thing he tells them, if you're going to run this race, yeah, you've got all these cloud of witnesses around you. Don't forget it. We're still in the Colosseum, y'all. We've laid aside the weights. We've got rid of the clinging sand. We're ready for the gunshot. We've started it. We've got all these heroes of our faith that are in the stands, egging us on, telling, hey, we've done it. We've done it. You can do it. You can do it. But those aren't the people we're supposed to be looking to. And encouragement. They hold us accountable. But he says, if you want to get to the end, consider Jesus. Look to the author, the founder and perfecter of our faith. Yeah, that's the founder and perfecter. That's the beginning and the end. The Alpha and the Omega. The one who started all this, that brings it into being, and then the one who brings us to the end. Just this morning in Sunday school, we were in Philippians, and we looked at Philippians 1:6. For he who began the good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Christ Jesus. The fact that Jesus ran the race perfectly and redeemed us is the only hope that we have. See, the Christian life isn't one that has this list of rules and then said, if you do all these things and you do them right, you do them well, and you do more good than you do bad, then you're going to be okay and everything's going to go okay. Nope. That's a false religion. The Christianity says, yeah, you have all these rules, and guess what? None of you kept them. And I really don't care how many good ones you did, because you messed up that one. And we're being honest, we messed up a lot more than we did. We've messed up numerous, and we messed them up numerous times. And so he says, if that's the case, how in the world are we ever going to get through the race we've already lost? We've been disqualified. So one became a man. It wasn't just one, it was God. God came down, took on flesh, and he said, I'm going to run the race perfectly. I'm going to do everything you couldn't do. All those rules, I'm going to keep them. I'm going to keep them to the fullest extent. And when I reach the end of it, the finish line, it isn't going to be full of confetti and people cheering me on. It's going to be full of people yelling, crucify him, crucify him. When I reach that point, rather than a trophy, I'm going to receive a tree. And on that tree, I'm going to pay for all those rules you broke. And I'm going to give you all the medals I earned. And then they're going to put me in a grave because, y'all, they don't know who I am, and they're actually stupid enough to think that's going to work. But it ain't. Because I'm going to beat that too. Because guess what? You guys just couldn't not only keep the rules, there was that big bad thing called death that we all lose to, it seems like. But every win he's ever gotten is repugnant when Christ Jesus comes and the grave's busted. Because he defeated death. And so we have one who ran this race and finished it, and we looked at him, the founder and the perfecter of our faith, the one who works in us, that says, guess what? You weren't perfect when I saved you. You're not perfect now, but I'm still working on you. And one day, sin is going to be nothing but a distant memory. He's the one we look to. He's the one that gives us the encouragement. And guess what? It can be so easy sometimes for us to get off course. It's the baseball, right? What happens when you swing and you miss? Christian life seems to be a lot of swing and misses sometimes, right? We hit something's thrown at us. We want to live the life of faith. But guess what? We take our eyes off the ball. We start swinging wildly. Keep getting more strikes. You can't take your eyes off Jesus. He's the perfecter of faith. I remember in high school they made us run the mile. And I don't know if anybody in here is a runner, but if you are, you're crazy. Anyway, we had to run a mile. They got that track that's around the football field. And the most disheartening thing about that stupid track is that it took 4 of those things to get a mile. Right? You know how disheartening that is? Because you start over here and you keep running, and yeah, you're looking down from the stands and you're like, that thing ain't that long. Until you get in the middle of one of those curves and you realize this curve has been going on for like 3 hours. You're going to get around this curve. And so you finally get around it and you see where you started and you get there and you're like, all right, now do it 3 more times. Boy, it's disheartening. But if you want to run with endurance, you can look to the finish line. It'll encourage you. It'll draw you. This is one of the reasons, y'all. I don't think we ought to live the Christian life with our heads up in the clouds. He got all of the disciples for that in Acts 1 when he said, stop looking up and start looking out. I'm telling you to go be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. The way you see Jesus leave is the way he's going to return. So, yeah, we're not supposed to live our heads in the clouds. You know, we're supposed to live for him here and now. We're supposed to be serving people. We're supposed to be spreading the gospel above all, telling people about him. We're supposed to be lights, salt in this earth. And so we're supposed to do all these things that represent him. So yeah, don't live with your heads up in the clouds, because you've ever heard it before. Somebody is so heavenly minded that they're earthly good. Right? That's the real thing. But the other thing that's true is there's people that are so earthly minded they're no heaven. They're so caught up in the things of this world. I think one of the awesome things about church is that when we gather together and we sing the songs and we open the Bible and we read these stories and we think about these things and we think about what Jesus did for us, for an hour. 2 if you come to Sunday school. 3 if you come on Sunday night. 4 and 5 if you come Wednesday morning and Wednesday night. But regardless, for those times, we gather together. Again, we talk about things that we need to do. We talk about things in our life. But I hope also, it's my desire, that we see a glimpse every Sunday of something that we're going to see in heaven. It's my desire that we come here to peek our heads in and see a world that's better than this one, so that we're encouraged when we leave the place. Yeah, we don't need to live our heads in the clouds, but those times when we come up and we consider Jesus, and we begin to look at him, and we have fresh eyes, not distracted by all the things of the world, those are the things that light the fire. Those are things that keep you from going weary and faint-hearted. If you run without it, you get burned out. But we focus on him. We bring it to the end. And you'll run well. You won't run perfect, but you'll run well. That's the faith we have. As you stand